And maybe this is the answer that I've been looking for the entire time to feel better about whatever this life is. Welcome back to another episode of Book Therapy. In this episode, I want to explore the book The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. Kahlil Gibran was a Lebanese-American writer, poet, artist, philosopher, even though apparently he rejected that title. To me, he's another mystic speaking about the unspeakable. And his mysticism, his point of view, his peace was inspired actually by many different religions. He was brought up Christian, then was inspired by Islam, Sufism, Theosophy, and the Baha'i religion. I just learned what 2 of those are. But this speaks to this overarching theme amongst these sort of writers that not one idea is specifically the one and only truth. There seems to be a through line with all of these religions and ideas. And to me, that's heartening. And luckily for us, Kahlil Gibran shared these ideas through multiple books, his most famous being The Prophet. And we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of it. It was published originally in 1923 and has sold around 100 million copies. This book is about a fictional, mystical character named Mustafa who is leaving the city of Orphalese where he has lived for the last 12 years. And as he is leaving, the villagers, the people who love him, stop him and ask him different questions about life and the human condition. Before he leaves on this fictional boat, and whether that boat is a metaphor for death or a death of sorts, I don't know. But before he leaves, he drops these wisdom bombs all over the place on everything from love to marriage to work. It's great. And they're also paired with his drawings of humans entangled in these beautiful positions that make the writing all the more expansive and expressive. Really, he's another mystic speaking in riddles, but these are beautiful. As soon as I was able to look up the definitions and find out what some of the words meant. Thanks, dictionary function on Kindle. But the more that I go down these rabbit holes, the more that I see that the only constants are death, taxes, and also paradox. And that's frustrating to the ego. But maybe that's the point. And that's where we pick up with this book. The idea that to label something is to end it. To name it is to put it in chains. Because we can experience something and it can be beautiful and transcendent, but as soon as we try and catch it, or be present to it, all of a sudden it's nailed down and disappearing at the same time. He goes on to speak about how comfort kills life. This is something that rings true specifically for me with my obsessive compulsiveness. The other day I wrote in my journal that every protection that I put into place feels like a little death. It's like I'm trying to hold a sword like a knight, but I'm holding it by the wrong side and I'm cutting my hands. It hurts. And if we make things too safe, we're not really experiencing what this life has to offer. He says, verily, which means truthfully, verily, the lust for comfort murders the passion of the soul, and then walks grinning in the funeral. He also says, separation of tasks. Don't put your tasks onto somebody else, whether it be a stranger, a politician, the barista at Starbucks, and more painfully, our friends, our family, and even our children. Their life is not our life, and yet we are always connected to them. Gibran says, love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. It's this middle ground from a needy, clingy love to a complete freedom. Truth seems to lie somewhere between it and encompassing it at the same time. And one way we can express this love through each other is through work. This part of the book reminds me of Viktor Frankl talking about the meaning of life. For him, having it come down to living life for someone, something, or doing life the best that we can because it's what we have. This book discusses work with one of its most beautiful lines. Work is love made visible. I like to think of this as service is love made visible. What you do as an expression of yourself for others, whether that be being a bus driver or a particle physicist or a YouTuber, whatever you can do to give yourself in service to this world seems to work on a universal scale as well as a primal scale, with supporting each other as humans and as spiritual entities, or ones and zeros in the Matrix. In another one of my favorite lines, he says, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Because apparently, the soul is boundless. And this mortal life gives us the opportunity to reconnect with that, with its joy and its hardships. I take this to mean that I that I can embrace my issues, my problems, my worst possible parts of myself, my anxiety, my depression, my obsessive compulsiveness. I can embrace these as teachers, as impetus to uncover the path. Because otherwise I get lost in the joy and the pain. Again, there's semantics here, but I mean the temporal joy and pain of life. Because he says, in this life, pleasure is a freedom song, but it is not freedom. Do I want happiness or do I want peace? In fact, it makes me think again of Viktor Frankl in speaking about how happiness ensues. It's not a goal to be attained. It's something that comes about once we are living life to the fullest. He also says, for even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. That's a beautiful sentence. And it really speaks to this idea of joy and sorrow being two sides of the same coin. And also this path of looking for truth as being devastating and hard. I'm in the midst of it right now. Look at my other videos, they're dark. But I keep coming back to these riddles, even though they frustrate me, because there's a sense of peace there. He says, you shall be free indeed when your days are not without a care, nor your nights without a want and a grief, but rather when these things girdle your life, and yet you rise above them, naked and unbound. You experience them, but you don't let them take you down. You rise with them. They act as wings, not as weights. And that's tough for me when I'm afraid of germs and vulnerability with people and the pain of my own darkness. And yet when I push through that, when I do the scary thing, life seems to open up in brilliant ways. There's not this commitment to good or evil, but a surrender to all of it. Within paradoxes is peace, and that's a paradox in itself. And maybe this is the answer that I've been looking for the entire time to feel better about whatever this life is. Peace is to accept the tension. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't really want to label whatever my belief at this time is, but the experience of it gives me a sort of relief that other worldly therapies haven't been able to provide, besides Chipotle. And now, death. You know I have to talk about it. Any great mystic is going to discuss it. And I think it has to do more not only with the actual physical act of dying, but also death within life, a resurrection within life to a greater purpose and understanding. I wouldn't know anything about that yet. I'm getting there, I think. But it's summed up beautifully in this quote. These mountains and plains are a cradle and a stepping stone. They hold us and push us at the same time. And whether or not our transition from whatever this experience is that, or if it's something different, I don't know. But it is also interesting to think about the idea that before this life, we either probably don't remember it or it was fine, whatever that darkness was. And then the darkness afterwards, this second darkness, will probably be something similar. Hopefully. Hopefully not eternal fire. Who knows? For some, this life is eternal fire. I certainly feel that sometimes. Thanks, Kindle. That doesn't make sense. It's more like, thanks, OCD. But we all struggle with different things, with different sins, the things we've done, the things we are. But I love his visualization of this, where he says to judge our whole selves by these parts of us is like judging the ocean by its foam. It's beautiful. But we know we can't actually control what happens to us. We can use agency and decide how we respond to situations, but we don't get to choose the cards that are dealt to us. And I need to keep that in mind more often. Acceptance. Anthony DeMello speaks of awareness, awareness, awareness. This makes me think of acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. Speaking of judgment and having perhaps a problematic certitude, Kapil Gupta says that people have made God into a genie and a warden. That will probably offend some people. And at the same time, how do you pray? There have been times where I've begged and pleaded with something to help me. But is that the relationship that is the most fruitful or even true? I don't know. Because to me, it seems like God or this universe or this program that we exist within doesn't care about us in the way that we anthropomorphize it into. It cares about us in that it supports us, in that it has given us life, whether we believe in it or not. And through this life, we can either decide to be distracted by it or caught up in it, or use that as the bread to bring us back to home, to something more, And I don't know what that is. But as I've gone through a lot of this material, more and more I feel like I'm seeing through a sort of mirage. A mirage that exists in reality for us. It's real, but there's also something more. Maybe. Or at least it feels like, let's say you don't believe in any of this universe, matrix, God stuff. Even without that, we die. We die in this reality. The people around us die. And what does that mean afterwards? Unless you are one of a very small group of people, within a few generations, we are forgotten. So within that matrix of just a physical, a carnal life, there is still a lack of meaning, which also lends itself to an explosion of joy because there's freedom. Because what does it matter? Paradoxes on paradoxes on paradoxes. It keeps going. Because of course, like some would say, well, then you could just lie and cheat and steal and kill and fuck and all these different things. Sure, you can. And then we're getting into moral philosophy and the different versions of why or why not that's a good idea. And because we've all agreed to live in a society together, perhaps there should be some rules. But even with those rules, there seems to exist an undercurrent of something more. And these mystics are trying to explain it to us in a way where we can uncover it for ourselves. Because what they're saying is just a map. It's only a map. It's a map of a mountain, but it can't put us on the mountain. We have to climb it ourselves. He says, these things he said in words, but much in his heart remained unsaid, for he himself could not speak his deeper secret. I feel like I see glimpses of it. I feel like I'm coming closer to it through all of the experiences that I've had in the last few years, through death, through pain, through job loss, through all these worldly things. I feel like I'm coming through a sort of hell into a different version of whatever this life is. Maybe a second life within life. And currently I'm reading the book Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. And he discusses the idea that perhaps the problems in life aren't just bound to happen, but are also a necessity for uncovering peace. Hell is not a place that you go when you're bad, but a stopping point on the way to heaven. Because without hell, none of us would want to change. We're too comfortable, especially in this time period. It's so hard to quantify this feeling, this experience. It seems that on a certain level, we might feel or know that something else is there, that there's this connection, that there's this oneness. But the problem is that it seems to paradoxically exist at the same time as our separateness. And we are so used to defining things as black and white. Well, I feel like I'm a separate person, so therefore that's the only answer. But what if it's both? He also says, these things move within you as lights and shadows in pairs that cling. I remember being in therapy. My therapist says, I want you to imagine a birthday party and a funeral in the same room. And that sounds like it would be easy, but for me, I couldn't do it for weeks. I could not imagine a birthday party with its joy and balloons and party atmosphere in the same room as a funeral, with its flowers and black formal clothes and stale coffee. But to be able to hold these separate truths at the same time, that seems to be something of great value. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's what's so hard to speak about with this experience of bliss, is paradox. It's so hard for us to wrap our minds around because it's holding opposite truths at the same time. We are separate, but we are one. There is love, there is hate, there is good, there is evil, there is all of this, and it is all within us. And whether we believe in it or not, it's happening in whatever this is. I'm not sure I understand what any of this stuff means, but he even speaks to that. He says, if these be vague words, then seek not to clear them. Vague and nebulous is the beginning of all things, but not their end. And I fain would have you remember me as a beginning. I would like to have you remember me as a beginning. And with that, here is the end.